From sleeping in my car to running my own business. I never thought I'd tell this story. For years, I was ashamed of it. But maybe someone out there needs to hear it, to know they're not alone, and that rock bottom doesn't have to be the end. Rock bottom. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in my car. Not because I was adventurous or chasing some van life dream. No. I was broke, unemployed, and one step away from giving up completely. I'd lost my job at a restaurant after it shut down. I couldn't afford rent anymore, and my landlord kicked me out. I packed my few belongings, a backpack, a box of clothes, and a blanket, into the back seat of my old beat-up sedan. That car became my bedroom, my closet, my safe space. I parked in different spots every night so nobody would notice. I brushed my teeth in gas station bathrooms. I showered once a week at a public gym, sneaking in with a free trial pass. Every night, lying in the back seat, I thought, this is it. This is how my story ends. The humiliation. Poverty is loud in your head but invisible to others. During the day, I pretended I was just another guy hanging around town. I'd sit in libraries because they were warm and free. Sometimes, I applied for jobs on the public computers, praying my phone wouldn't get cut off before someone called back. But nobody hired me. Not with my spotty resume. Not with the smell of exhaustion clinging to me. I still remember the cashier who looked at me with pity when I paid for food using a handful of nickels. That burned worse than hunger. The turning point. One night, parked outside a grocery store, I saw a flyer taped to a lamp post. Day laborers needed. Cash paid daily. No experience. I had nothing to lose. The next morning, I showed up at 6 a.m. A group of us stood shivering in the cold, waiting for the foreman. Most were immigrants who spoke little English. When the truck arrived, we climbed in like cattle. The work was brutal. Hauling bricks, digging trenches, lifting until my arms shook. At the end of the day, I was handed $40 in crumpled bills. It was the first money I'd earned in weeks. That night, I ate a hot meal. And for the first time in months, I thought, maybe I'm not done yet. Small steps. Day labor turned into steady work. I wasn't strong, but I showed up every day, and that mattered. The foreman started calling me first. With my tiny income, I bought a cheap gym membership, not for fitness, but for showers. Finally, I could walk into job interviews without smelling like sweat and despair. I kept applying, and eventually, I landed a part-time warehouse job. The pay was low, but it came with something priceless: stability. Learning a new world. The warehouse wasn't glamorous. Stacking boxes, scanning barcodes, endless hours on my feet. But I treated it like school. I learned how inventory systems worked. I asked questions about logistics, about shipping routes, about supply chains. Most coworkers didn't care; to them, it was just a paycheck. But to me, it was a chance. At night, I watched YouTube videos about business, listened to podcasts about entrepreneurship, read free ebooks on management. Knowledge became my escape hatch. My first side hustle. One day, I noticed something. The warehouse threw away damaged packaging, boxes with dents, products with tiny scratches. Most were still perfectly usable. I asked my boss if I could take some home. He shrugged. "If it's trash, it's trash." I cleaned those items, photographed them with my old phone, and listed them online. To my shock, people bought them. $20 here. $50 there. More than my daily wage sometimes. That was my first taste of business. Scaling up. Within months, I was making almost as much selling online as I did at the warehouse. I reinvested every dollar. Buying cheap bulk items, flipping them for a small profit. I wasn't sleeping in my car anymore. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and broken heating. But to me, it was a palace. For the first time, I had a door to lock, a kitchen to cook in, a bed to collapse on. The doubt. But even as things improved, doubt gnawed at me. What if this is temporary? What if I fail again? What if I lose it all and end up back in my car? There were nights I stared at my ceiling, paralyzed with fear. Poverty teaches you not to trust good things. It convinces you happiness is a trap. But I kept going. One listing at a time. One sale at a time. A lucky break. One day, a customer messaged me, "Do you sell in bulk?" I had no idea what to say. I wanted to scream, "No, I'm just some guy in a tiny apartment." But instead, I said yes. I scrambled to find a supplier, begged for credit, and somehow delivered the order. That single transaction made me more money than an entire month at the warehouse. That was the moment I realized, this could be bigger than a side hustle. Building the business. I quit the warehouse. Terrifying decision. But I knew I had to bet on myself. I registered a small business license. I rented a cheap storage unit. I started sourcing products more seriously. At first, it was chaos, late deliveries, angry customers, mistakes that cost me hundreds. But I learned. Each screw-up was a lesson. And slowly, the business grew. Helping others. The best part? Hiring people like me. People who were struggling, overlooked, desperate for a chance. I gave them jobs packing orders, managing stock, handling shipping. Watching them earn steady paychecks reminded me of my own first $40 from day labor. We weren't just building a business. We were building dignity. Going back to that car. One night, years later, I drove past the grocery store where I used to park and sleep. The same lamp post stood there, but the flyer was gone. I parked for a moment, just sitting in silence. Remembering the cold, the hunger, the hopelessness. And then I smiled. Because I wasn't that person anymore. Where I am now. Today, my business pays my bills and more. I have an apartment I love, food in the fridge, savings in the bank. I'm not rich. But I'm free. I can take a day off. I can help my mom with her bills. I can donate to shelters where people sleep in cars like I once did. Most importantly, I wake up every morning without that crushing fear of, how will I survive today? The lesson. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped, if you think rock bottom is the end, hear me, it isn't. Rock bottom is the foundation. It's where you learn what you're made of. I slept in my car. I ate dollar store noodles. I worked until my hands bled. And step by step, I climbed out. If I can, so can you. Growing up invisible. When I think about my childhood, the first word that comes to mind is hunger. Not just the kind in your stomach, but the hunger of wanting more out of life. I grew up in a tiny town where the only thing louder than the church bells on Sunday was the silence of broken dreams. Everyone knew everyone. And everyone knew we were poor. Our house wasn't really a house, more like a leaning box patched with whatever scraps my father could find. Winters were brutal. I used to sleep in 2 pairs of socks and a coat, because blankets weren't enough. At school, my classmates would whisper about my shoes, the ones with duct tape holding the soles together. Teachers told me I was bright, but it didn't matter. Brightness doesn't pay bills. The shame of small things. Poverty has this way of making you visible for all the wrong reasons, and invisible when it really counts. I remember one field trip. The ticket was $12. My mom pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm sorry, honey, we can't afford it." I told my classmates I was sick that day. Truth was, I sat at home, staring out the window, pretending I was there with them. Another time, during lunch, a kid noticed I never bought food from the cafeteria. He asked, "Why don't you ever eat?" I laughed it off, saying I wasn't hungry. But my stomach growled loud enough to betray me. I went to the bathroom and cried. The decision to leave. By the time I turned 18, I knew one thing: if I stayed, I'd rot. Most people in my town worked dead-end jobs, drank too much, and talked about what they could have been. I didn't want to be another ghost of what if. So I packed a backpack, just a couple shirts, a notebook, and my mother's old coffee mug, and left for the city. No plan. No money. Just the desperate hope that somewhere else had to be better. The cruel welcome of the city. The city didn't care about my dreams. It spat me out like gum on the sidewalk. I crashed on couches, took odd jobs, washing dishes, carrying bricks, sweeping warehouses. I remember walking home once at midnight, my shoes soaked through, $17 in my pocket after a 14-hour shift. I thought, maybe I should just go back. But every time I considered returning, I remembered the look on my mother's face when she hugged me goodbye, equal parts pride and fear. She had silently handed me $20, the last bill in her purse. I couldn't waste that sacrifice. Coffee as an escape. Funny enough, what kept me going wasn't ambition at first. It was coffee. On my worst days, when everything hurt, I'd sit in the cheapest cafe I could find. For $1.50, I got a cup of coffee and an hour of warmth. Watching people walk in with laptops, suits, laughter, it felt like another world. A world I wanted to enter. That's when an idea began to whisper, what if one day, I owned a cafe like this? What if I could create a space where people felt hope instead of shame? The first leap. Dreams are cheap. Rent isn't. Still, I started saving every coin. I took 2 jobs, dishwasher by day, night janitor by evening. For 2 years, I barely slept. But slowly, a few $100s became a few thousand. One night, exhausted, I told a coworker, I want to open a coffee cart someday. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped a plate. Man, you can't even afford rent. Who do you think you are? That stung. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, who says I can't? My first business, and failure. With $1,200 scraped together, I bought a second-hand cart and a basic espresso machine. I didn't know anything about permits, marketing, or branding. All I had was grit and Google searches at 3 a.m. The first morning I pushed that cart onto the street, my hands shook. I scribbled, "Coffee $2, on a piece of cardboard. The first customer smiled, handed me a $5 bill, and said, "Keep the change." I almost cried. But reality hit fast. My machine broke down twice a week. The city fined me for not having the right paperwork. Rain ruined my setup. After 6 months, I was broke again. I wanted to quit. I sat on the curb one night, staring at my useless cart, thinking, maybe everyone was right. Maybe I'm just a poor kid pretending to be more. The kindness that saved me. But then something small happened. One of my regulars, a middle-aged woman who always ordered cappuccinos, noticed I was down. She asked, "Rough day?" I confessed everything, the broken machine, the fines, the debt. She listened, then said, "You've got something most people don't. Heart. Don't waste it." The next week, she brought a friend, who just happened to be a small business lawyer. He helped me fix my paperwork for free. That act of kindness was like oxygen. Rising again. With new permits and a repaired machine, I restarted. This time, I hustled smarter. I learned marketing, handing out free samples at the park, posting pictures online. I experimented with recipes. Cinnamon lattes, honey cold brew. People came back, not just for coffee, but for the warmth. I worked through blisters, exhaustion, doubt. And slowly, the line grew. After 2 years, I saved enough to rent a tiny brick-and-mortar spot. It had peeling paint, a leaky roof, and barely enough space for 5 tables. But it was mine. The grind behind the dream. Owning a cafe wasn't glamorous. I mopped floors at midnight, fixed toilets, and argued with suppliers. I once had to choose between paying rent or buying beans. But every morning, when I unlocked the door and smelled the first brew, I felt alive. Customers became friends. A lonely old man came every morning just to talk. A group of students studied there until closing. A single mom brought her kid, saying, "This is the only place I feel at peace." That was when I realized, I wasn't just selling coffee. I was selling hope. Breaking through. 5 years after pushing that rusty cart, my cafe was thriving. We expanded, hired staff, even hosted open mic nights. People started recognizing me around the neighborhood. "Hey, you're the coffee guy." One local magazine even wrote an article, "From Poverty to Pour Over, the story behind my cafe's name." I clipped it and mailed it to my mom. She cried on the phone, saying, "You did it." Looking back. Now, when people ask how I escaped poverty, I tell them the truth. It wasn't luck. It wasn't talent. It was 1,000 humiliations, 1,000 tiny steps, and the refusal to quit, even when quitting seemed easier. I built a life out of duct tape and desperation. And if I could do it, anyone can. Final reflection. Sometimes I still catch myself saving scraps of food or turning off lights obsessively. Poverty leaves scars that don't fade. But those scars remind me of where I came from, and why I'll never go back. Today, when I hand a customer a warm cup of coffee, I smile. Because I know, for someone out there, this might be more than just coffee. It might be hope.